reluctant left-handed God. So let's begin. God number 005 was seated in his transportation throne and rode in on the solar winds. He had been given a new section to administer, and he rubbed his hands in anticipation. He parked centrally and looked around. In the far distance were billions of suns flickering. Each had their own god, and each was in competition for promotion to area manager. Flicking his Ronson lighter, he blew so the flame went flying. It stopped a short distance away, centered itself, and he set it spinning with his finger. As the flame spun, it compacted and became brighter. That's better, God thought as he looked around. He gathered a small collection of asteroids and pressed them in his hand. With a fingernail, he gouged out some elaborate features. Planet without features was boring, and he wanted to stay interested. A lot depended on his performance here. And if he did well, a promotion would be in store to control of a galaxy. He made a few more globes and then crafted them as he did the first. Each was to be different to add diversity. He held the last one in his hands and regarded it intently. He had special plans for this planet. He worked carefully and gouged out large sections for oceans. When he had enough, he popped a sucker in his mouth to increase his saliva, then spat, filling the oceans to capacity. He stuck a finger in his ear and spread the contents over the face of the globe. Placing it near the fire, he allowed it to heat until the surface was covered in green mold. This was allowed to grow and evolve. He placed the orbs hovering in front of him and then set them spinning. He stood on his throne and pulled a retractable pool cue out from a side of the cushion. With the right English, he could set them in orbit around the fire. The first went around close and in perfect orbit. He set the others in motion and then sat back and admired his work. Due to the gravitational differential of the other planets, the orbit of the one closest to the sun began to stretch. God shrugged. It wasn't a big enough problem to deal with right then, maybe later. As he watched, he saw that the orbs were being hit with asteroids as they passed by. Irritated by the destruction on his lovely planets, he placed smaller orbs around the larger ones so that the asteroids would hit them instead of his nice clean planets. Satisfied, he sat back and watched them. He quickly began to lose interest watching them spinning around. He dropped onto the planet he had worked hardest on. It was a work of art, and he wandered around admiring the sun's light and warmth filtered by atmosphere and clouds. The vegetation was varied. He sampled a few, and other than a slight taste of earwax, they were excellent. There were plenty of differing vegetables and other forms of flora that could be eaten or simply appreciated. He was enjoying himself. He rose and sat back on his seat. His fingers drummed on the arm of his throne, the steady beat drifting off into the cosmos. "Boring!" he shouted to the celestial ether. He closed his eyes and thought about having some company. From his thoughts materialized a host of beings, a host being 25. But not liking an even number, he thought up to 26th. Unfortunately, at the point of creation, God was distracted when one of the new angels farted. All the laughter startled God, and the new angel didn't come out as he intended. This one was short and balding. Its beard was scraggly, the wings slightly lopsided, and its face seemed to be perpetually astonished. God was about to eliminate this uncouth being, but it looked so pathetic that God relented and had him mingle with the rest. For a while, God was content. With his new company, he played poker and pool. He created a nice place for them to hang out at and said it was so nice it was like heaven. They was agreed, so it became the heaven pool and pub room. Every now and then, God would invite one of his angels to see the planet he had created and given life to. He was justifiably proud of his creation and wanted to share it. All the angels that he brought admired its beauty and varied plant life. That is all except the runt. He was brought down and immediately cried out, "Boring!" God cocked an eyebrow at this impertinent angel. The angel hastened to explain, "No offense meant, but God, it's so boring. There's no active life to it. It's just a nice garden. Whoop-de-doo." God looked around and saw that the runt was right. It was boring, and he could see it now. He called down his host. Why didn't any of you tell me how boring it was here? The angels cast a look of irritation at the runt. Well, you are God, and everything you do is perfect. How could we tell you it was flawed? God stamped his foot, creating a fissure which would become the Grand Canyon. Hell, if I wanted a bunch of yes men, I wouldn't have given you free will. So, show me what it needs. The angels sat on the ground and dug up some earth and began forming animals to bring life to the planet. These were allowed to roam freely. The runt went over by a tree and was forming an animal of his own. He kept giggling as he formed it, and when done, he went behind God and set it between his legs. God felt the brush of fur against him and picked up the small object. He turned it over and over, trying to figure out what the heck he was looking at. All right, which one of you drunkards made this monstrosity? He held it in front of him by the scruff. This looks like a committee effort where everybody gets to choose his favorite part, then stick them together. He looked down to see a runt with a red face and cheeks puffed, trying his best not to laugh. Oh, this is your whatever you call it. So what do you call it? The runt's laughter burst out at last. He was weak and leaning on the guy's leg as he gasped, It's a platypus! And he lay on the grass and his feet kicked up in the air, laughing all the more. God shook his head, shrugged, and put the platypus down to go doing whatever a platypus would do. God turned to the runt. Better? The runt looked around. Better? But it's still boring. God slapped his sides in exasperation. Turning to the angels, he asked for suggestions again. They were set to make more animals when God held up a hand and turned to the runt. Well, Brainiac, what do you think we need? The runt sat on a rock and putting his elbow on his knees and his chin on his fist, he thought hard. He jumped off the rock and ran up to God. People! It needs people! They kind of look like us, but don't have all the magic stuff we do. They don't have wings either, and they have to do everything for themselves. That's what makes them interesting. God patted the runt on the head as the other angels made the noise usually associated with the phrase ass kisser. God had each of the angels make some people. God himself sat by a pile of dirt and made one as well. The runt was on the other side of the dirt pile and was fashioning his own, but he wasn't content to just make one that was similar to himself. He added and subtracted and fashioned something very different from the others. God had everyone bring their creation to life. From the other side of the dirt pile, God heard a long, low whistle. Around the pile came a figure who walked with supple grace and who made God and the angels blush. So beautiful was it to behold. God admired the runt's work. Hey, what do you call this masterpiece? The runt was transfixed by his own creation. It's a she. When a he and a she get together, they'll make more all over the world. Soon all the angels were creating a she. Once life was given to them, the she's and he's immediately got together and had the first orgy. God looked down at the commotion happening around him. Well, it isn't boring now. One day God woke later than usual. From the time he slept to his awakening, several hundred years had progressed on earth. By his bed was a stack of reports. He rang for breakfast and sat up to read what had happened during his nap. He was interested in what happened to the first two people he and the runt had made and who had chosen to be together. Apparently their children were not what would have been expected from the first ones created. He tut-tutted over Cain and Abel's constant bickering over which one was better and which was more loved by God and their parents. When he read about Cain slaying Abel, he slammed the papers down, breathing heavily. He picked up the papers and continued. Every report was about things going from bad to worse. God ate his breakfast hastily and then called a meeting. He stood on one of the pool tables and clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. All right, when I went to bed, everything was fine. The people were starting to spread out and start families. The earth was doing well and growing everything anybody would want. Not only did one of you idiots place a tree of knowledge in their midst, but also a tree of life. What were you thinking? To make matters worse, I see that you let a couple of them eat from the tree of knowledge. I don't mind free will, but giving them the same kind of knowledge that we have really screwed things up. It was too much, too soon. It really messed with their heads. He looked around the room. Well, that damage has already been done, so we can't stop it, but I'll be damned if I'll let them eat from the tree of life. 4 of you cretins will have to stand guard around it. Take swords with you to use as a threat. Rotate sentries every 10 years or so. 4 left to draw swords from the lockers and head to earth, grumbling loudly about having to stand guard. Can we bring chairs? You'd be just as threatening with the swords. He was smacked upside the head for the suggestion. God said stand guard, not sit guard. Hold on one second, I'm wondering. God sat heavily into a chair and quaffed a beer. The runt was confused. God, why not just uproot the trees? God looked down and patted the runt's head. Nope, they planted them, now they have to deal with the consequences. He took the runt by the hand, and together they went down into a cloud to observe what was happening. God lay on his stomach on the cloud and peered over the edge. His sandaled feet kicked in the air. He dropped the cloud closer for a better look. Not liking what he was seeing, he expelled air through his rear and sped across the face of the earth. There seemed no end to the mischief the people were getting into. Lying, cheating, rape, and murder were rampant, and there seemed to be very little that could be done about it. The runt was sitting next to God on the cloud. His feet dangled over the side as he solemnly watched the scene that seemed to be depressing God. Runt, what the heck did we create? You would have thought with our bringing them to life and part of ourselves being part of them, they would have turned out better. The runt kicked his feet and watched below, not noticing that one of his sandals was slipping off. It dropped suddenly and landed on a person's head, knocking him out cold. When he awoke, the man seemed dazed and in a state of confusion. God and the runt brought the crowd closer still, as the man seemed more interesting now. He was going around buying up as much wood as he could. Next, he bought nails and tar. He made marks on the earth and drew a shape resembling a boat. Oh, when he hit his head with your sandal, I think you scrambled his brains. Looks like he's going to build a boat, and he's nowhere near any water, especially not enough to float that huge thing. The runt flew down and retrieved his sandal. As he rose again, he kept looking back at the man. He felt guilty at causing the man's confusion and wanted to set things right. Hovering in front of God, he looked down again. God, do you mind if I go down and fix him? He's going to receive a lot of grief. He received a lot of grief for doing this. God was watching as stakes were laid down and boards and poles were laid next to them. No, I kind of want to see this one through. The runt sat down next to God, and after ensuring his sandals wouldn't fall off again, he continued to kick his feet. Reaching over, he took a handful of cloud and stuffed it in his mouth. He puffed out smaller clouds and linked them together. Down below, the man was working feverishly to build a boat. Some of his neighbors came over to find out what the heck he thought he was doing. When he explained that it was necessary because it was going to rain soon, they laughed. They decided to humor him, though. They shrugged and helped him build his boat. They acted as if it was a serious endeavor, but when his back was turned, they laughed again and made rude gestures. They wanted to see what this lunatic was going to do when he had a huge boat outside his house and no water to take it anywhere. Now, the runt felt bad for the man and kept asking God to let him fix the poor man's head. God was adamant that he wanted to see this one through and was getting irritated at the continual niggling. Look, if you can't sit still and watch this with me, do me a favor and go run my bath. The runt grunted and aimed for God's bathroom. Due to his wings being slightly off-center, he had to aim to the left so he could arrive at the bathroom door. He started the water and tested it to ensure it was hot enough to God's liking. Since God's tub was extraordinarily large, he floated off to the pool room until it filled. He liked pool and was gradually becoming better the more he played. Several angels who were playing cards and drinking challenged him to a game. The runt was delighted. He ran to the end of the table and racked up the balls. The first game went quickly as the runt knocked the 8-ball in on his third shot. Soundly defeated, he called for a rematch and racked them up again. The second game went longer and was more evenly matched. He went to check on the tub, informing the other angels he'd be right back. Well, seeing an opportunity to get the runt in trouble, they distracted him so the tub would overflow and make a mess. When he came back and the game began, they all crowded around the table. Whenever he made a shot, the angels would cheer. Whether he won or lost, there was always another challenger, and the runt played game after game, getting more excited and single-minded as the games went on. All the time, the water in the tub was nearing the rim. In the meantime, God was still watching as the man and his neighbors who had almost finished the boat. There was plenty of room inside. His boat was enormous. God went down to have a closer look and talked to the man. He landed the cloud nearby and strolled up to the builder. So, why a boat out here? The man rubbed his temples. I've been asked that so many times until I'm tired. We're in for a big storm. I mean, a real big storm. So big it's going to pick this boat up and take it away. God looked up at a clear sky. So, when's the rain going to start? Soon. Very soon. So, why is the boat so big? Got a huge family or something? The man looked startled. No, I'm not sure why I built it so big. He looked up to the highest point and then from stem to stern. It really is big, isn't it? The man looked up at the sky. A few drops of rain began to fall from a clear sky. God was confused. He hadn't set up rain for today. Perhaps one of the angels wanted to have some fun with this guy by sending down a summer shower. The boat's owner was running inside, tossing his possessions into the boat and pushing his family inside. As you rushed about, God asked him his name. The man answered distractedly, no, I usually just called Fred. All God heard was the no, The rest of this statement was lost in a clap of thunder. From then on, the man's name was Noah to God. Moments later, the rain started to come down harder, gathering in pools on the ground. God excused himself and went to the clouds he had been resting on. Rising, he checked the other clouds and over this area. Look, the rain wasn't coming from here. He went to the pool room. Everyone was crowded around the pool table, and the runt was making a spectacular break. Cheers sounded on all sides as the runt made shot after shot. God was surprised the runt was doing so well and paused to watch. The runt was clearing the table in effortless style and looked around, acknowledging the enthusiastic cheers. He spied God looking over an angel's shoulder, and at that moment remembered God's bath. With a red face, he flew like a missile for the bathroom. The tub must have been overflowing for a while and was leaking out the door and pooling in the cloud outside. He went with a bucket and mop outside just as the cloud gave way under all the excess weight and dropped the water on the earth. The animals with an instinct for survival more developed than the people's had migrated to the large boat and were welcomed inside. No one noticed, thankfully, that each animal had brought with them some food to last a while. The man locked the boat and climbed up with his family into the topmost cabin. The runt was on the earth trying to fill buckets of water and dump them into the oceans. God came down and told him not to bother. The runt was hurt. But God, what about all the people that came from the originals we made? God shrugged. Seems to me they weren't our best work. We'll see how the small group works out, and if they don't, we'll try again. God went up to take his bath, performing a cannonball into it that sent another 1,000,000,000 gallons earthward. The runt sat up on top of a mountain and watched the water cover the earth. With all the water from heaven finally done running over, he spread his wings and began fanning the earth, endeavoring to evaporate it all. Up in the pool room, the angels were disappointed that the runt didn't get in trouble for flooding the earth. They huddled together to work out a new scheme for ridding themselves of teacher's pet. The runt watched the boat settle in a pocket of the mountain he happened to be on. The occupants and animals all departed quickly as the stench of animal and human feces was overwhelming. Even the runt high on the peak placed a wing over his nostrils. The people from the boat settled near the foot of the mountain and, being a randy bunch, immediately began to repopulate the earth. By the time God was finished with his bath, enough time had passed on the earth that people were once again populating in abundance. What a horny bunch these people are, thought God. The angels were called for another meeting. God stood on the pool table and brought the meeting to order. Look, there have been a few attempts in getting this planet headed in the right direction. Thanks to the runt's accident, we have an opportunity to start again. We'll keep a sharp eye on this new beginning and see how it goes. If these don't work out well, I'll just have the runt draw me another bath. God chuckled at his joke as he took the runt and had him rack up a game. The runt got a pitcher of beer and some glasses, then racked up for 9 ball. First ball popped high into the air and through the window. It hurtled through space, speeding up until it blazed like a comet across the sky. It landed with a powerful crash into the center of the huge landmass. The force of its landing created cracks, and then the Pangea was broken into many smaller landmasses that drifted apart on the waves. The angels rushed over to the cloud God used as an observation platform and peered hopefully over the side. While the runt repaired the window, God sailed down to the cloud to see what damage the pool ball had done. The angels were nudging each other in high good humor. Well, this ought to do it. The runt would finally get his comeuppance. God lighted on the cloud and looked over the earth. He stood transfixed at the varied continents and small islands. He put his head on one side and folded his arms. The angels waited for an explosion. God called for the runt very loudly. The runt came rocketing down and stood before God at attention. God bent down and looked the runt in the eyes. Well, you've done it again, haven't you? The runt peeked over the side of the cloud and saw the earth now broken up. He gulped and he looked up at God's stern countenance. God, I'm sorry. I just used too much force on the brake and God held a restraining hand. I meant you screwed up something in such a way that's actually an improvement. The angels gasped. It's going to be interesting to see how this pans out. Now they're isolated from each other and will develop independently. Now we'll get some real diversity. Well done. God took the runt's hand and they went back up to finish their game. The angels remained on the crowd and groused about how every time the runt screwed up, God was all, well, aren't you clever? Look at how much better things are now. They moaned and groaned back up and drowned their anger in beer. Let's begin where we left off. Now, God was not insensitive to the grumbles and accusations regarding his favorite. He thought it might be a good idea to send the runt to earth for a while. There was a group of people called the Ninevites who were veering into dangerous habits. He felt if he sent a representative to call and explain matters to them, then maybe they might change their ways. He was tempted to go in person, but he wanted to see how the runt would do as an intermediary. He explained to the runt his mission and explained in no uncertain terms that he was to pick a person to actually do the job. It was better for one of the people to get the rewards and fame than one of the angels. The runt packed a small rucksack and flew down to earth. He decided to pick someone from Israel as it was one of God's favorite places. The runt landed in an inconspicuous area and tucked in his wings. He gave him a slightly hunchbacked appearance, but since there were plenty of others similarly afflicted, he wasn't worried about it. He walked around looking for a likely person to send. He came upon a forlorn man sitting on a mat by the side of the street. The runt sat next to him. So, what you doing? The man looked at the runt and shrugged. Well, I want to be a prophet. Can't seem to get anyone to take notice, much less hear me out. The runt grinned. He had found the perfect person in no time. Hell, what you need is to do something big. I mean, really big. Something that makes your name a household word. The man looked nervous. What do you have in mind? The runt rubbed his hands together. My profitable friend, I'm in need of someone to do something for God, and you're the very man I was looking for. The man scooched away and drew his blanket tight around him. The runt walked over closer to him. What's your name? The man drew in his blanket. Jonah. The runt placed a hand on his shoulder. Well, Jonah, how would you like a trip to the capital of Assyria, all expenses paid? Jonah's face turned pale. But they're our enemy. They hate us. The runt shrugged. Yeah, I know, but God thinks if you go and warn them that he'll demolish your city, they just might change your ways. So, what do you say? Ready for that trip? He dug Jonah in the ribs. Jonah covered his head and ran as fast as he could to his house. He locked the door, shut the windows, and hid under a blanket under the bed. When he opened his eyes from under the blanket, he was greeted by the runt, who was laying on the floor with his chin on his fist, grinning from ear to ear. Boo! I found you! Now it's my turn, and you have to find me! Jonah crawled out and sat on the floor next to the runt. Why pick me? The runt patted him on the back. Sorry, but well, it's just how it goes. You want to be a prophet, and I happen to need a prophet. You help me, and when you come back, you'll be a famous prophet, and people will be lined up to hear you. Jonah went downstairs and looked at the doors and windows. All were as he left them, locked tight, yet this person had gotten in without disturbing anything. He turned around and bumped into the runt. Well, since you got in so quick, I'm thinking maybe you really do come from God. The runt turned around and let a bit of his wings show. Yep. So are you ready? Jonah filled a sack with clothes and other things he might need. The runt handed him a purse of coins and directed him to the docks. Now you take the first boat headed to Nineveh, and you tell him what God wants. Jonah headed outside and ran to the docks. The runt was so pleased at how easy this mission was turning out that he strolled up to the nearest inn to refresh himself. A couple of beers and a game of darts later, he felt it might be a good idea to check in with God and let him know the progress. He went out of town, untucked his wings, and started upwards. From high up in the air, he spotted Jonah on a boat. The grunt grunted acknowledgement that Jonah was on his way. He climbed a little higher and suddenly realized that Jonah was headed in the opposite direction. Irritated at Jonah for not doing as he was told, the runt descended swiftly and beat his wings so that waves overlapped the side of the boat. The sailors were not used to seeing the water this agitated and began to pray. Jonah cleared his throat. Excuse me. I think I might just be the reason for that's happening. He explained what he was asked to do and that out of fright he had done the opposite. The captain grabbed Jonah by the collar and half carried him to the side and literally kicked him overboard. Jonah didn't know how to swim. He sank once and the runt tried to catch hold of him. He couldn't grasp him and was looking for something to scoop him out with. Over to the side he saw a whale. Grinning and laughing, he zoomed over and sat astride it. He kicked with his heels and the whale sped forward. The runt waved his halo in the air and sang a quick yippee-ki-yay-ki-yee. When he neared where Jonah was floundering in the water, he roared out to the whale, "Dive, dive, dive!" The whale zeroed in on Jonah, opened his mouth, and swallowed him. Back on the surface, the runt turned the whale towards Assyria and prodded it forwards. From inside the whale, he could hear Jonah yelling to be let out. The runt walked on the whale's back to the blowhole and yelled down, "You can't come out because you were bad and didn't do what you promised. Now you'll get there the hard way, and I'm not going to rush. You'll spend 3 days down there and like it." Jonah grumbled as he sat on one of the ribs and bit into a raw fish. "I don't think I'm going to like it one bit." "I heard that," yelled the runt down the hole, and just to put Jonah in his place, he had the whale dive and then breach high in the air, coming down with a thunderous splash. Jonah promptly threw up. 3 days later, they landed off the coast of Assyria near the capital city. The whale opened his mouth and Jonah crawled out, smelling distinctly of fish. The runt reached into his bag and handed Jonah a bar of soap and told him to clean up or no one would come near them, let alone let him see the king. When he came out of the water, clean and smelling much better, the runt handed him a comb and dictated what he was to say. It took 3 days to get to the capital, and all the way Jonah prophesied that God's destruction was coming if they didn't change their ways. Now the city was a hotbed of vice and corruption. All along the way, Jonah could see the graves of people who had been tortured and burned. As he passed a group, he heard them talking about how the king had boiled a prophet, and since they were still alive, cut their tongue out and done their eyes. This didn't do much to quell the fear or settle the churning in his stomach. He kept looking around as he preached, checking to see that the runt was still with him. Had the runt left, it is probable Jonah would have hightailed it out the nearest exit. As Jonah neared the capital, the runt stood behind Jonah, and as Jonah spoke, the runt allowed just a little of his presence to be felt and seen. Granted, the runt wasn't as tall as Gabriel or as ominous looking as Satan, but just the fact that behind Jonah was a winged being just visible was enough. The people heard, including the king. Jonah wasn't sure if it was the way he spoke with authority or for some other reason, but the people took him seriously and put on sackcloths and fasted. The runt was delighted and put Jonah on the best boat for Israel. He soared back home doing loops and wide banking turns. His first commission, and it had almost ended badly. If he hadn't seen Jonah on the boat, he would have failed and been at the mercy of the other angels. He flew into the tap room of heaven and was greeted by God with a high five and a well done. The other angels grudgingly congratulated the runt on a successful mission, hoping secretly that the next would be a miserable failure. God had been receiving reports that his favorites were being persecuted. Of course, they were always saying they were being persecuted. Being God's favorites, they had begun to feel every setback was persecution, and God had just let them gripe without doing much about it. He sent a couple of angels down there, though, just on the off chance something really was going on. Well, just imagine his surprise when, yes, his people were actually being persecuted. God harumphed and felt it was time for a little intervention. Coming down outside of Egypt, he whistled for the runt to accompany him, feeling he might need the runt to cheer him up a little. The runt sped down and waited nearby. God was occupied in thinking about how to get his people out of there. He didn't want to just show up and scoop them in his hand, then dump them somewhere else. He liked having someone else acting as an intermediary. He'd do the work, God would assist, then the prophet would get the credit and fame, and people would believe in God through it. It was a simple process, and it worked, so why change it? He sent the runt out looking for a likely prospect. The runt had only gotten to the edge of the mountain when he saw someone coming up. Rushing back to God, he saw God had set a bush alight and was reading the latest news by its light. The light glowing from the top of the mountain was probably why the person had climbed up. God saw the man as he clambered over the edge and laid down his paper, ready to speak to the man. The runt whispered in God's ear, which made God chuckle and indicate for the runt to proceed. The man came nearer and examined the bush. The runt threw his voice so it sounded as if it was coming from the middle of the bush. "Take your shoes off and sit down. We need to talk." The man unloosed his sandals and kneeled. "I want you to go see Pharaoh and tell him that the Israelites have to leave so they can worship God." The man looked upset. "Why do you send me?" The runt looked over at God, and God shrugged and let the runt commence. "Well, you're the one who came up here, so you go and tell Pharaoh what I said." Mo still wasn't convinced he really needed to do this, so he tried to worm his way out of it. "Look, I don't speak real well. I stammer, I stutter, I spit when I say lots of words. Maybe you better be better with someone else." He stood up and backed away. "Tell you what, I'll get my brother. He's a real good speaker." God slapped his forehead and made the fire burn red to show he wasn't pleased. The runt understood. "Get your brother by all means, but you're still in charge. I'm not going to let you worm your way out of it." Moses left and God picked up his paper. He put it back down again and turned to the runt. "Yeah, it's a real neat trick, you making your voice come out of the bush. Made it really impressive." The runt was pleased with God's commendation. He looked around and, spying a dead rabbit nearby, shoved his hand up its backside and proceeded to have a humorous argument with it. God at first was a little repulsed, but the argument was funny, and God couldn't help but laugh. Eventually the man came back. God made the bush flare up and indicated for the runt to go ahead. "Why have you returned without my people?" the runt asked as impressively as he could. The man was taking so long to get the words out, God was tempted to have the runt stick his hand up the guy in front and carry on both parts of the conversation. The man finally calmed down and explained that Pharaoh wasn't impressed and said no. He'd come back to see if God had any ideas on what he could do next. God and the runt talked for a little bit while the man made sandcastles and waited. The runt gave the man a list of magic tricks that should convince the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. If not, it would be time to play hardball. The runt followed the man and helped him to perform all the tricks on the list, and even the few the man threw in just to see how much he could do. Pharaoh had magicians of his own, and every time the man did a trick, the magicians did the same one. This kind of one-upmanship was getting on the runt's nerves. Yet the man dipped his staff into Pharaoh's swimming pool. The water turned red. The magicians could not turn it back. To make his point clearer, the runt caused the leak and all the water flowed into the main waterway, turning that red also. The man flipped the bird to the Pharaoh's magicians and haughtily marched out. When the man returned to the mountain, he told of what happened and bragged about what a great magician he was. The runt stood there with his mouth open and his hands on his hips. The arrogance of this guy. The man shouted from the top of the mountain, "I am Moses the Great!" The runt came up behind him and kicked him halfway down the mountain. Moses climbed back up apologetically. Moses' brother Aaron came running up the mountain. Pharaoh had agreed to let the Israelites go. Moses was so happy that he did the jig. On the run found a nice area that was unpopulated to bring the people to. But first they were to come to the mountain as God had some rules for them to follow. Then God would give Moses a map to the land they would be given. Moses and Aaron left to bring all the Israelites to the foot of the mountain to receive God's laws. Excuse me. While the two men went to get the people together and ready for a journey, God and the runt set out the rules they wanted God's people to follow. The runt wanted to add one that said, "Thou shalt not kill," but God said, "Well, thou shalt not murder." This confused the runt. "God, what's the difference?" God rose from his prone position. He had been dictating, and the runt was carving the laws into some stones. Now they're going to run up against plenty of folks who no longer believe in us. That means they're going to have to fight a lot. We tell them no killing, then how are they supposed to fight and win? We tell them they can't murder, then they can still fight a war. They just can't kill each other. The runt felt it was all the same to the person who's dead. Having worked out all the laws they wanted to hand out, they sat on the edge of the mountain and waited. From a distance, they saw a lot of people arriving. Seeing a multitude, God set about providing for this mass of humanity. He created goats and grains in plenty. Since the people were still a way off, the runt was sat down on the bottom of the mountain playing with the goats. Hearing a great clamoring of voices, the runt flew up the mountain and waited with God. Moses climbed hastily up the mountain, proud of his accomplishment in bringing God's people hither. As he climbed, he called to the crest of the mountain, "I'm here, God. I brought them just like you asked me to." God shook his head as he looked down at the climber. "Like I could see him a mile off." God, what an idiot. God went back and rested against an olive tree, and as the man came up over the top, he made the bush flare up again. While God and the man talked, the runt flew down the back of the mountain and emerged with wings tucked and joined the merry throng. Wandering around, he watched as very few people prayed. Some gambled, some played, and others cooked the goats and made bread. They were distributing all the spoils they had received as departing gifts from the Egyptians. The runt was enjoying the grand party they were throwing. He could have gotten upset by the lack of prayers going up to God, but after all the time of persecution, he felt it wasn't a bad idea for them to blow off a little steam. It was taking a long time for Moses and God to finish talking. Days turned to weeks and longer. People were beginning to think maybe Moses wasn't coming back, so they set about electing a new leader. The new leader sat on a hillock and pronounced that since Moses wasn't returning, then there wasn't a God for Moses to meet. It had all been a ruse for Moses to become king or something like it. People agreed with his reasoning and asked what they should do now. He decided they could create a new God who would be answerable to them. Aaron heard and was astonished. "But that's not how this works. You can't create your own God." He rushed around trying to explain things, but the people weren't listening. They built a fire and melted gold. They poured it over a carved image that would serve for them as a god. The elected leader named himself first priest and had them pray to the golden image. The runt walked up to the image they had created. It was 10 feet tall. The figure was of a man with arms crossed over his chest. The face was simplistic and didn't really look like anyone. Its head was bald and standing on a golden pedestal. It glowed in the fading sunlight. They had named it Oscar. He kicked it and watched as it slowly toppled over. As he flew up to God, he saw them struggling to put the weighty statue back upright. Arriving at the top of the mountain, God was standing with Moses and giving him final instructions. Moses was struggling under the weight of the tablets and looked very uncomfortable. The runt ran up behind God and tugged at the hem of his robe. God waved him away and continued talking, but the runt wasn't to be denied and continued tugging. God swung on him and saw the runt pointing for him to look down where the people were. Sight made God angry. He told Moses to hightail it down and get those people in line. Moses scurried down, juggling the tablets as they wobbled in his arms. God had the runt make a new set just in case one was dropped. Moses seemed to be capable of getting the people in line. He and Aaron had to roar and yell and scare him to do it, but they found a way. God looked down at the multitude and stroked his beard. He had grown one after all the paintings and sculptures of him had it. That was what the people expected. He felt it was only right to look as they wanted him to, even though they had never seen him. He looked at Moses and Aaron and trying to work people into place and appointing leaders, working out how to get this huge mass of people going where God wanted them to. The look of bewilderment on their faces was eloquent, and God had mercy on them. He had the runt go in front of them in the shape of a pillar of fire to guide them. The runt had never tried to transform himself, and the best he could do looked like a cherry popsicle on a stick. God laughed at the unimpressive sight and transformed him into a powerful pillar of fire that people could see for miles. Once the runt was at the head, people got their heads out of their posteriors, realizing that God was watching, and if they didn't show more capabilities, then God might choose another group. At the first rest, Moses complained that the tablets were pretty heavy, and could he pass them around for others to carry? The runt flamed a deeper red, signifying anger, but changed and told Moses to build a chest for them. That way others could carry them, and they'd be safe. God phoned down to the runt with specific instructions on the chest construction. The runt didn't understand the reason for the detailed list, but passed it on to Moses. As the chest was being constructed, the people started complaining that they didn't feel they had enough food. The runt told God, so God had him produce pheasants in plenty. Now the people were complaining they ate too much and were lying on the ground groaning and farting. With the chest constructed, it traveled behind Moses, being carried by some who were made priests and caretakers of the chest. Several felt that since there were oxen, maybe a cart could be used instead of them. Moses called them all into line and soundly smacked them for impertinence. Some had thought carrying the chest was a fantastic idea. At the next stop, people were again given pheasants to eat. They sat around gnawing at the birds, grousing about having to eat the same thing all the time. The runt sat on the chest and bemoaned that all the Israelites seemed to do was complain. He got God's permission to make manna every morning as an alternative to the pheasants. Of course, the people became greedy and started hoarding. So the runt made what was hoarded and turned into worms. Once more, the people cried out that they were thirsty, and there wasn't any lakes or ponds to fill their gourds with. Moses complained to the runt, who told him to take his staff and poke a hole in the rocks nearby. When he did, water began to flow, and the people filled up all the gourds and skins they had. After that, any time they needed water, Moses would pound on a rock face, and water would flow. Moses soon began to make it seem as if he was making the water flow. The runt had a heart-to-heart with Moses and told him that from now on, if he wanted water from stones, he should lay aside his staff and pray to God to give the water. Moses continued to bash with his staff to the runt's dismay, but people had to have water, so the runt was forced to let it out. God was on his cloud looking over the Israelites and getting more frustrated all the time. All they did was complain and moan about how much better they had it in Egypt and how they wished they hadn't left. When God's anger became too much, he sent down lightning bolts down to try and frighten the people to shut the heck up. The first few times it worked, but after a while they realized God wasn't hitting anyone, so they shrugged and keep complaining. The runt was closer, and the constant wailing and whining was getting on his nerves. He was tempted to take them to the promised land immediately, but God was against that idea. His purpose, he said, was to teach his people that being God's chosen came with the responsibilities. The runt was looking tired and wore out, so God decided to spell him for a bit. The runt could rest up and play some pool and cards and enjoy himself. Once God felt it was time, he would switch off again. Besides, he wanted to see what was going on firsthand. From where God usually watched, the gripes were muted by distance. As he placed himself at the front of the milling throng, he heard not only the horns calling people into place, but the perpetual whining that the runt had spoken of. After a week of hearing this, he had had enough and began contemplating just leaving them here in the middle of nowhere to fend for themselves. There were plenty of other people to choose from. Why saddle himself with this ungrateful throng? He was so upset that he decided to teach them a lesson. We'll pass over what he did, as it wasn't pleasant. People realized, though, that it doesn't go well when you push God too far, and they felt that they had done just that. To make matters worse, God decided that he would force them to wander around for a much longer time than the trip required. By the time they reached the promised land, they would be so relieved they'd stay in line for a long time. When the runt returned, God stayed instead of going back up. He and the runt took turns either as a pillar of fire or as a wanderer mingling among the crowd and trying to keep them complaining from starting up again. Once, when the people were at rest and bored, the runt attempted to liven the mood by sticking his hand up a dead camel and started talking. God had to quickly stop due to the screaming and people throwing up. Let's keep that trip just between us, he admonished. Well, it's coming to an end. After 40 years, God decided that his people were back to the way he wanted them. He brought them to a cliff and showed them the land he had promised. It was a good sight, and the people were thankful. They rushed on ahead to claim their inheritance. Moses was an old man now and was trying to go with the rest. The runt was holding on to the hem of his robe, and he couldn't make any progress. Tired of trying, Moses started stomping, yelling, and carrying on. The runt made a small fire on a nearby bush and spoke out of it. Sorry, bub. You remember all the times God told you to just pray for some water and you make it come out? Moses nodded sheepishly. I kept using your stick and trying to make it look like you were doing it. Well, because you got a swollen head, just like before, you can see the promised land, but you can't go any further. Moses slowly lowered himself on the ground and lay back on the hard earth. Suddenly his legs were kicking and his hands were beating the ground. I want to go! I want to go! You promised! You promised I'd see the promised land. He sat up, still pounding his fists. I gave you the best part of my life, and this is the thanks I get? You renege on your deal at the last minute? It's not fair. And the runt made a nice little area for Moses to spend the rest of his life on, and gave him plenty to eat and drink. Every now and then his children would come up for a visit and let him know what it was like. Around the third visit, they started to do nothing but complain, and Moses was finally glad he had not passed over. Here he was able to rest and have peace and quiet. Once in a while, the runt would visit, and they would play cards and drink a companionable beer together. This one's titled Challenges. God and several angels were having a late-night poker game and talking about some of their favorite chosen people on earth. One angel was discussing the challenges they face with keeping the chosen ones of God on track. We have to keep on them all the time or they fall away. You don't realize how much it takes to keep them on track. God took a large bite from his hoagie and pointed to a picture on the wall. It was one of his favorites by the name of Job. This one doesn't require any upkeep. No matter what, I bet he'd stay on track. Satan came back from refilling his tankard. Of course he would. You've given him so much, why wouldn't he? But you take all that away, and I'll bet you anything you want, he'd bail in a heartbeat. God quaffed the rest of his beer and slammed the empty tankard on the table. Done, he cried. The angel looked startled. I'll bet you a second set of wings that he wouldn't. Now, Satan had always wanted a second set. Those were for the highest ranked angels. So far, there was only Gabriel, and he never had to clean toilets or unclog sinks. God set aside his plate. Let's put some rounders first. Satan looked up from his cards and set them aside. What kind of rules? Sounds like you're not so sure as you were. God tapped on the table with his pencil. That's not bad. I just think if we're going to make a bet, we should say exactly what we're betting on. Satan shrugged. Okay, but we both have to agree on them. God nodded and wrote the first item. You can't kill them. Satan smote his forehead with his hand. Duh, what's the point of killing him? Fat by the good, I bet is if I kill him. God crossed it off as unnecessary. Okay, you can't harm him physically. Take away his house and property, etc., but you can't harm him. Well, how about his family? God looked startled. Oh, you really are pushing this bet. Okay, but nothing happens to Job. The bet was sealed and Satan went down to earth and immediately demolished Job's house and dispersed his cattle. He sent a wind to engulf the place where Job's family was staying. Job sat outside the remains of his house and mourned his family and the loss of his home and cattle. He kneeled in the dust and sand and prayed. God looked down and saw that it was just as he had said. Job stayed true. Satan arrived back and sat down exhausted. God looked at Satan and smirked. Well, it looks like you don't get that second set after all. Satan looked down on earth to see Job praying. God's grin was a challenge and Satan rose to it. Look, take away a man's home, he can build another. Take away his cattle and prosperity, he can get that back eventually too. Even his family doesn't really affect him. But you hurt him physically. Now it's personal. Make him sick or feel bad. Cover him in something like boils. Give him hemorrhoids. Then he's going to be unhappy enough to curse you. God gave this consideration. So, you want to go double or nothing? Satan rubbed his hands and sat across from God. What are the stakes now? If you do this and he doesn't turn, then you lose your wings for 500 years and you have to stay on earth during that time. Well, Satan nodded and lay back in his chair. But what if I win? God drummed his fingers on the table, trying to think of something that would please Satan. I'll place you as head angel for 2 millennium. Satan's eyes flew wide. That was almost as good as being God. The alternative wasn't attractive, though, and he had to think hard about doubling down. Done, he said at last and took God's hand. Satan flew down and contemplated what would do the job on Job, but not be so ridiculously unpleasant that God will try foul. He settled on boils as being unpleasant, uncomfortable, and visible. Job, once afflicted, went to bed and lay there. A couple of Job's friends stopped by periodically to talk with him. They expressed concern that Job must have done something pretty terrible for God to be letting this happen. Months go by and Job is no better. His friends taunted him so much that Job raised on an elbow. I haven't done anything and stop saying I have. You've got it spread out all over town that I wouldn't be in this fix if I had been a good man. God's just asleep at the wheel, or he'd never let me go through this. If not, well, all his frustration burst through. Well, then he's against me, and I say he's my enemy too. I'm a good and holy man, and God is now my enemy because he is allowing me to suffer. At these words, Satan flew up to the bar and demanded God pay up. Satan received a second set of wings and promotion. Gabriel was demoted, but only temporarily. But God was hurt, both that he lost the bet, but more importantly that his favorite had failed the test. God called the runt over and had him go down and have a heart-to-heart with Job. The runt descended and tucking his wings under his robe, he called on Job. Job was laying on a mat laid on the floor of what used to be his home. The runt walked in and sat down. So, how you doing? Job looked at the runt exasperated, then lay back and closed his eyes. Just dandy. The runt eased away a little as Job had been laying there for over a month and hadn't washed. Look, I just want to have a little talk with you. Job opened his eyes and glared at the runt. Nah, you're just like my 2 so-called friends. Always want to talk. Job, you had to have been a real bad boy or this wouldn't be happening. Job, God doesn't treat good people like this. Do good and good things will happen. I've led a good life, a great life. I pray, I tithe, I sacrifice. I do everything God says to do, and I'm one of the holiest people around. The runt was shocked. Hell, you've got to get that ego in check. Job sat up and jabbed a finger into the runt's chest. I'll go even further. I was God's favorite. If God was ever going to visit anyone, it would be me. The runt shrunk into himself. Oh boy, I don't think you should have said that. A gust of wind rose from nothing, and a swirling mass of sand, dirt, and wind hovered outside what was left of Job's home. God called out to Job just as the runt hid behind a remnant of all. God explained the facts of life to Job, stressing God's pleasure, and laid out what Job would have to do to get into God's good graces again. Job humbled himself and bowed before God. The runt came out of the corner and kicked Job in the rear as he passed. Unfurling his wings, he called down, "Go take a bath. The boils will go away." Job dashed to the river and bathed, then went to church and prayed. He spent the next 5 years doing good works. He helped little old ladies cross the street, rescued kittens from trees, assisted his neighbors, and went back to doing all the holy things he had done before being afflicted. The runt watched and with approval and even tested Job a few times to make sure the lesson stuck. When he was satisfied that Job wouldn't stray again, he flew up to God and then went back off to play some darts. Now God was looking, this is the next chapter, called Just a Pinch of Salt. I need a drink, hold on. God was looking over the reports from his angels on a series of places with questionable conduct. He read the reports casually until he came to Sodom and Gomorrah. This is one of the worst and would have to be made an example of. Trouble was, one of his most trusted prophets lived there. He'd have to take this one on personally. He whistled for the runt. "I have to go talk with Abraham. Why don't you pick another angel and you both come down with me? While Abraham and I talk things over, you go do an inspection of Sodom. Abraham's brother Lot lives there, so you see him first." They all went down to Abraham's place and sat around the dining room table and talked. Abraham was concerned for his brother as Sodom was getting pretty rank. Abraham told of all the gambling, drinking, riots, and rebellion against God and his people going on there. God hitched a thumb towards the door and the two angels left. At the entrance of the city, they were met by Lot. Lot was replacing a board over a window and reinforcing the door with a new lock. The runt and an angel named Bob approached and wished Lot good afternoon. Lot turned around and just said, "No." He continued to hammer away. The runt and Bob walked past him into the city. Lot suddenly turned around towards them and his face was ashen. "Wait, where are you going?" Bob answered, "We're here to do a tour of inspection. We heard things are pretty bad." Lot pointed his hammer at the reinforcements he had made. "Oh, do you think I boarded up my windows and reinforced my doors for the fun of it? It's worse than bad. It's a real shithole." He saw that the two were still heading into town and called after them. Hey, don't go in there. I'm not kidding. Stay here and I'll give you dinner and a place to kip." Bob and the runt turned around and went into Lot's place. Lot's wife left to get some more provisions. Within 10 minutes of her leaving, there was a loud pounding on the door. "Hey, Lot, we heard you got company. Send them out so we can get to know them better." The runt peeped out of the crack in the door. Get to know us better?" Lot had another lock on the door. "It don't mean they want to find out if you play cards or what books you like to read, if that's what you're thinking." Bob was startled. "Well, what do they mean?" Lot drew the bolt and the kicking and pounding commenced. "They want to play games with you and it ain't going to be any you'd enjoy. They'll beat you and sick the dogs on you, rob you, then beat you some more, passing you from one person to the next. Afterwards, they'll do whatever else their sick minds can come up with." The runt went over to the toilet and threw up. "Is this whole place like this?" Bob was at the window looking at the large crowd outside. "Yeah, it looks like it." The runt sat down on a stool and thought hard. "Look, Lot, you took us in and are trying to protect us. You're okay. But the rest of these people? Well, I don't think there's any hope for them. When we go back with our report, God's going to take this place out, and I don't mean for dinner. Bob, you stay here and protect our host. I'm going to do a quick check of the area and make sure there isn't anybody we want to save." Lost daughters wanted to get their fiancés. The runt promised to bring them back. "Pack what you can, and we'll escort you out of town." The runt passed through the wall and made a surreptitious route of the tour of the city. Both Sodom and Gomorrah were beyond help for sure. The runt for Lot's daughter's fiancés and folding them in his wings brought them to Lot's home. Bob, you lead them away. Take everyone through the back door. I'll go up the front and lead these idiots into town. Lose them, and then I'll protect you from behind. He paused a moment. God has already made up his mind, and this place is going down. Let's get you folks out quick, and whatever you do, when this place starts being destroyed, don't stop to watch the show. Just keep going, don't look back. Something bad always happens when people watch God at work. Bob punched a gaping hole in the wall, leading out, and led everyone out as fast as they could. The runt saw that people had seen them leaving and were giving chase. The runt spread his wings and flapped so hard sand and dirt flew at the crowd. The wind picked up harder and drove them back into town. All at once, God began the demolition with the rest of the angels encircling the two cities and pelting them with rocks. Lot's wife's curiosity got the better of her, and she turned to see the destruction. She immediately turned into a pillar of salt. Lot was going to turn as well to protect his family, but Bob kept him moving forward along with the rest of his family. We'll bring you back later, and you can see her then. Lot was safely delivered to Abraham's house, and the next day the runt and Bob took Lot to see his wife, or what was left of her. Bob was first to recognize the pillar, and that had been Evis, Lot's wife. The runt needed to explain a few things to Lot that the runt had heard from God. He told Lot that Evis had not wanted to leave, and she had let everyone know that Lot had taken them in. She had encouraged the townsfolk to play around with their new guests, and apparently this wasn't the first time. She wasn't a real nice person. As they approached the pillar of salt, they saw a person crouched on the ground cooking his lunch. Every so often he'd taste his food and then scrape a little salt from the pillar. The runt ran up to the man and tapped him on the shoulder. Excuse me, but you're adding this man's wife to your lunch. God was called back to the Godhead, where he was to report on the current state of things in his area. God wanted to take the runt along, but it was noted on the summons that God and only God could attend the meeting. The lead angel was left in charge while God was away. With Satan now the lead angel, the runt's life began to be a bit more difficult. He was consistently tasked to clean the toilets and to unclog the sinks. He was made to fetch the beer and refill the bowls of peanuts. He was consistently being pelted with peanut shells and never seemed to have time to play pool, throw darts, or to quaff beer. When things got too much for the runt, he had sanctuary in a couple of areas. The first was in God's tub. The second was under the bar, hidden behind the bags of peanuts, and the third was on earth. He went there when things were at their worst. The earth was no longer as God had made it in the beginning. Time had passed, erosion wore channels for rivers and caves. Rivers diverted and sometimes became waterfalls. The waterfalls made pools of crystal clear water. The vegetation that flourished was fragrant and beautiful. It was near one of these waterfalls that, sorry, already I'm getting my throat clear. It was near one of these waterfalls that the runt liked to hide most. Peace and solitude healed his soul, and he could find repose. After a few years of abuse from his brother angels, he had had enough and swooped down to his refuge. God would be back sometime in the near future, and the runt would go back then, and only then. He walked through the back of the waterfall where he had a stash of beer and other goodies. As the runt was fond of proclaiming, angels do not live on beer alone. Here in his solitude, he considered the earth and its inhabitants. God had his favorites. In fact, he had a whole nation he favored. The angels each had someone they called a favorite and whom they would keep an especial eye on. It kept them occupied and made some interest in their lives. Every now and then they would lay bets on their pets and then challenge them with some task or other. The runt considered this to be childish and took no part. In fact, he had no favorite to bet on. He considered that since he was down here for, well, who knew how long, it might be a good time to pick one. He spread his wings and flew around, searching for a decent-sized town he could find his conscript at. He saw one which looked like a promising place to find a prophet. It was small enough to be unsullied and large enough that he could have plenty of people to choose from. In the market were many who claimed to be prophets or messengers of God. They stood on boxes or tables and shouted to the crowds. He listened as they preached of things to come that never could happen. He saw those who sought only to curry favor and win a following, but their words held no substance. He walked the market, circling around the stalls and listening. So many prophets, he wondered how anyone chose one to follow. And the shouting! How did anyone hear their messages? The voices blended and caused a raucous noise. He turned towards the edge of the market, where funneled into the center of town. Seated on the mat was someone who was simply sitting and talking in a quiet voice. The runt watched as the man continued to talk. Eventually, a person, curious to hear what he had to say, sat down to listen. The man on the mat spoke in a conversational tone without recourse to the growls and spitting used by many farther away. The runt joined the lone person listening and heard the prophet's speech. For when a man loves his fellows without judging them or trying to place them beneath them, they shall know the Lord God. When man can hear the word of God in peace and quiet, he shall know the Lord God. When the people shall speak only the truth and forswear idle chatter that instructs not, they shall know the Lord God. The runt looked and saw that others had joined and were listening. When you are willing to treasure another's life, happiness, and prosperity without coveting them and their possessions, you shall know the Lord God. God speaks to your heart, not in thunder and in loud tongues, but speaks quietly, so that you must listen with a quiet heart. A few people dropped some coins and left some produce. The man gathered his takings and was about to leave when he noticed the runt was still there. Hi, can I help you? The runt put on his friendliest grin. Hi there, you're a pretty good prophet. The man acknowledged this ability by inclining his head modestly. The runt rubbed his hands together. So, how would you like to be my favorite? The man's smile turned sickly. He nodded to the runt and ran. You're not so fast. The runt had a hard time catching up to him. He saw him enter his home and followed. The door was locked, but that was no hindrance for an angel. He located the man under the bed. The runt climbed on the top of the bed and hung over the side. So you're another who likes to play hide and seek. The man crawled out backwards and huddled in the corner. The runt held up his hands in front of him and approached the man slowly. Hey, easy, pal. I must have started our conversation badly. Sorry. He unfurled his wings and smiled. See, I wouldn't do anything to you. It's just that God and all the other angels have their favorite people, and I don't. The man picked his jaw up from the ground and pushed his eyes back in their sockets and bowed respectfully. Runt had never had anybody bow to him before, and he kind of liked it. What's your name, my friend? Oh, please, get up. It's difficult to talk to you in that position. The man rose, cracking up the joints as he straightened. My lord, I am your humble servant, Doofus. Well, Doofus, I'm usually called the runt, not my lord. I like the way you talk to people about God. I think I can help you. Doofus made a pot of tea and some cookies, and they sat down to discuss Doofus's future. Doofus was to go on a lecture tour to a neighboring village and see how many people he'd convert over to God. If he got 100 people, Doofus, with the runt's assistance, would be allowed to perform one miracle. That way you can really build up a reputation. I know the angel Locutus allows his person to do a miracle or two, so why can't you? Doofus was getting enthusiastic about being able to perform a miracle. He quickly packed a bag and headed out from the nearest town. The runt spent some time in the village talking to people in the inn, and as he quaffed beer and played darts. After a week, he was curious to see how his protege was getting on. He went to the highest hill and looked over towards the village Doofus had gone to. To his surprise and glee, he saw Doofus striding back with a stream of people following behind. The runt flew in the air and did a rapid count. 115. Doofus had been working hard. The runt was curious as to what Doofus had in mind for his miracle. Runt met him halfway back and congratulated him on his success. They were a short distance away from this convert, so the runt thought it might be a good time to see what miracle he wanted. Sidling up close, he spoke softly. Well, did you have any time to think of what miracle you want to perform? The man's smile became a broad grin. If you are true to your word, I have. I want to see the earth as God sees it. The runt thought for a moment. Well, how about if I take you up to the cloud God uses to look down on the earth? Doofus got so excited he almost cried. The runt went behind a hill and came out so that only Doofus could see him. Doofus had gathered his converts around and had them sit while he performed his miracle. I shall now go to meet God and return, for he that gives me life strengthens me for what lies ahead. Doofus held his arms out to the side as the runt picked him up and slowly took him above the clouds. They landed on the cloud God used as a vantage point and looked down. Doofus looked out over the face of the earth and then down on his converts. To the left was his village, which he was bringing them to. Through his tears, he saw what God saw and felt he understood a few things better. God saw the big picture. His angels had a smaller picture, and he, as an agent of God and one of his angels, had the smallest picture, but a higher focus. He saw his place in God's plan as never before, and it humbled him and exalted him. After viewing all before and below him, he had peace in his soul for the first time in a long time. He was sure of himself and his task. He was ready to start again. The runt slowly brought him down. His converts bowed in awe at his miracle. Bow now to me, for I am simply God's messenger. I have sat in God's resting place where he watches over the earth. Now it is time for me to teach you so that you may go and convert others. He had them pitch tents and shelters. They gathered their food and provisions, and the runt saw to it that there were animals so they could have eat, and plants for the people and plans for the people and animals. He had set things in motion, and now it was out of his hands. He bid Doofus farewell, but promised to check in periodically. Besides, if you ever need me, just pray, and I'll hear. The runt spread his wings and flew joyously back home. Back in the Heaven Barn pool room, there was chaos. Peanut shells were a foot deep, empty kegs littered the outside, and 12 of the 17 toilets were plugged up. Satan was furious. He was jumping and stomping on the pool table and had been calling out for the runt for weeks. When the runt appeared at the window, Satan flew at him. Get your ass in here and get this place cleaned up and orderly. What did you think you were doing going off like that, leaving us here with nobody to clear up and fix the place up? I'll see you pay for this. He stripped the runt of his wings and set him to work on the toilets. Gabriel followed to assist him. Sorry, little buddy. I'm in the same position. Satan stripped me of my wings and powers. I did my best, but they messed things up on purpose just to give me grief. Together they worked on clearing up the messes and burning the trash. It took the better part of a month to bring things back to order, and in all that time, none of the other angels helped. They stayed in the pool room, played darts or pool, and quaffed beer. The runt and Gabriel were beginning to wonder if God really was coming back. Satan apparently believed not, so he had appointed himself God. For the next month, Satan and the angels pushed around Gabriel and the runt to the point the runt wished he had wings to go visit Doofus and his converts. Gabriel and the runt were outside on the edge of heaven looking over the earth. From here was a big blue ball in space. It looked so small and unprotected. Satan and the angels didn't keep watch and didn't care about anything but themselves. The runt built up excuse me. The runt built up the sand into a pile and sat on it. If we're made from God's mind, how can Satan and the rest be the way they are? Gabriel sat next to the runt and placed an arm around his shoulder. I'm going to tell you a secret that doesn't go further than here. God is above us, but there are gods above him. We're all good and bad in the same shell. Some of us choose to be good, to try to be what God intended us to be. Others use free will as an excuse for letting their worst side out. God gives us the choice, and it is what we are and what we do when we think he's not watching that determines our true nature. Runt, God has been watching even when he isn't here. That's why I've been calm in chaos. I know God will be back. When? Well, that I don't know, but when he returns, I know there will be a reckoning with Satan and his buddies that will be frightening to behold. Come on, we better get back. It's about time for the pool tournament, and they go through a powerful amount of beer and peanuts. Sure enough, when they arrived, all the beers were banging tankards on the table and bellowing for the beer and peanuts. Well, Gabriel went round with the pitchers. The runt was dishing up and passing out the peanuts. Satan was making an impressive break. Shot after shot went in without any difficulty. One of the angels was getting upset, sure that Satan was making use of his powers as first angel. In order to test this assumption, he nudged the runt into Satan's back as the runt was picking up and dropping off a bowl. Satan's shot went wide and then reversed course and spun into the cup. More than a few angels realized what Satan was doing and called foul. It wasn't the revelation of his using his powers to cheat that made Satan angry. It was the fact that the runt had spilled beer and peanut dust on the back of his robes. Satan whipped around and sent the runt flying with a kick. Chased after the runt, booting him high into the air time after time. Gabriel tried to intercede, but was booted for his troubles. The rest of the angels joined in, and for half an hour the runt and Gabriel never landed, but were continually bandied about until finally they both landed on the floor and crawled under the pool table. Satan stormed through the throng of angels, pushing them aside as he forced his way to the table. Lifting aside, he grabbed the two by their torn and sodden robes. He hauled them off the ground and dangled them like fish on a line. Gabriel had had enough. He bellowed with all his voice, "Who in the name of God do you think you are?" Satan shook them. "In the name of God, indeed." He roared so that the pool room shuddered and glasses fell off the tables and crashed on the floor. "I am God." From the entranceway, a voice said quietly, "Actually, I am." God had returned. If it took the look on his face was any indication, he was royally pissed. He penned the rest of the angels into a corner and barricaded them in. God grew so large that his head brushed the lights hanging from the ceiling. He grabbed Satan by the wings and brought him close so they were eye to eye. "Now, who are you?" God asked with quiet menace. Satan was momentarily stunned, but his wits returned quickly. God had given godlike powers to Satan at his departure to ensure things were kept orderly. God, in his anger, hadn't required them. Satan noticed that the caged angels were at God's back. He released them, and they all quietly stalked in behind God. As they rushed to batter God with chairs and tables, the runt and Gabriel snuck up behind them and grabbed a pair of wings each. The angels cried out in pain as the runt swung from the wings and Gabriel plucked feathers. God, turning swiftly, saw the released angels and used Satan as a club, swinging him left and right, cleaving a path through the mob. As God passed back towards the center, he pulled wings off one angel and then another. In honor of their heroic efforts on his behalf, he gave back to Gabriel the wings and powers that were rightfully his. The runt got back his wings, plus another set. God stood in front of the stripped angels and glowered. "Did you think I didn't know what you were doing in my absence? Did you not realize retribution would be by my hand when I returned? You are no longer fit to remain here. I cast you out to live on earth. Powerless, but with the lifespan of the angels, you will toil for your daily bread. The sun will bake you till you are dried husks. You will receive no help or guidance from me or those who reside with me. I cast you out of my presence." With an angry gesture, Satan and his traitorous angels were cast forth. Satan was cast upon a barren desert, there to bake in the arid heat until he could find his way to civilization. The rest of the angels were scattered far and wide, each to a site of desolation to wander without aid. In Satan's mind, he cursed God and those with him. He vowed to find his brethren and gain converts to himself. With enough converts and prayers, He would gain in strength until he was equal with God again. Then he eventually challenged God with an army of his own. It's titled Back to Normal, Almost Normal. God was seated on the floor in a corner. The runt was laying at God's feet and happy that God was back at last. Gabriel was seated next to God and trying to comfort him. God was hurt that not one, but almost all his angels had acted as they had. Now there was nobody left except him and his two faithful friends. Well, boys, what do we do now? The runt rolled over. God, why don't you think up some more angels, but think it out carefully. Give them the personality you want them to have. Loyal to you, integrity, industry, obedience. I mean, free will is all well and good, but you have to have control too. Gabriel agreed. God, eventually Satan will want a rematch. If your new angels aren't loyal to a fault, Satan's won before the war even starts. The runt was startled. How can he wage a war when he doesn't have wings or power? God reached over and tousled the runt's hair. Oh, he'll get converts and prophets of his own. Their devotion will build what I took away. When he received godly powers, he also received godly knowledge, more's a pity. God sat up straighter. Oh, sounds like a good idea, and I'll act on it in a bit. First things, though, how can I repay you for your loyalty and willingness to fight on my behalf? The runt and Gabriel stammered that they didn't want anything. God smiled on them. I thought you'd say that. But I still want to do something for you. Gabriel, how would you like to be back at number one angel with all that goes with it? Gabriel blushed and grinned. He was speechless and overjoyed to be able to sit at the right hand of God again. In the next second, his wings, power, and authority were returned, and his throne beside God was made even grander. God looked at the runt. Now let me look in your heart. God looked and saw that the runt's heart was almost completely full of love for him. However, in a small corner, he saw the runt wanted to be on earth as a human to experience the joys and hardships. God folded his arms and leaned back. Explain, please. The runt sat up straight, crossed his legs in the tailor's seat, and put his hands on his knees. God, I want to spend time on earth and live with them for a while. That's why I can understand them better. After all, they've changed from the ones we created, and while you know them and what's in their hearts, we angels should know them through experience. God pondered on what the runt had said. Well, my friend, I hardly agree with you, so much so I may do it myself someday. So, what age do you want to start at, and how long do you want to stay? The runt was so excited to be able to live with his humans, he couldn't speak. Runt, let's start you off about 10. That's old enough to be a man and young enough to live a good long life. The runt's wings vanished, and he was dressed appropriate to where God was going to place him. Runt, I want you to be safe, so while I've taken your wings, so you'll look more like them, I won't take your powers. Just use them sparingly and when necessary, and don't let on you're an angel. God kissed him on the forehead and placed him beside an olive grove, fast asleep. Next chapter is called On Earth. The runt woke and went to the river to splash cool water on himself. The sight of himself as a youngster made him so happy he turned a few cartwheels. A woman rose from the other side of a tree and was looking down with a smile at the runt doing cartwheels. Well, where'd you come from? The runt dropped down due to his head spinning. He looked up at the lady and smiled back. Far away. I was dropped off here this morning. Now I need to find a place to stay and a place to work at. The lady put her head on one side and considered the youth before her. She liked his smile and open, honest face. Why don't you come with me and you can stay with my husband and me? He's a carpenter. If you're willing, he can teach you as an apprentice. The runt jumped up and followed her. And he had to walk a little faster so he could stay next to her. She held out her hand, he took it and skipped along at her side. I need a drink, hold on. As they made their way, the runt put in a silent call to God with a request that he look after the runt's favorite and that Doofus may need a miracle or two. God checked on Doofus and reported back that he was well and had converted plenty of people more than before. So God would grant any miracle that was asked for. Arriving at the lady's home, they found her husband working in his shop. He looked up when she called to him. Walking around the table, he was surprised to see a small boy holding her hand. "What's this?" he asked, pointing at the runt. "Dear, it's a who, not a what." She squatted down so she was eye level to the runt. "Even as a human, he is still short." "What's your name? I forgot to ask." The runt shrugged. "Well, everybody calls me Runt." She patted his head. "We'll have to find a better name for you than Runt. My father's name was Samuel." Runt was nodding enthusiastically. "Well, that sounds a lot better than Runt." She looked at her husband and he shrugged. "Well, why not?" She found an apron, put it over Samuel's robe. She brought him in front of her husband. "Samuel, this is Joseph." They shook hands and Joseph asked Samuel to sweep the shavings and dust up. Samuel took a bowl of water and flicked over some over the ash and shavings. He did this so he didn't kick up a lot of dust. Once the floor was swept and clean, he placed a broom in a corner and stood in front of Joseph waiting for another task. Joseph appreciated that his assistant wanted to work. He set him up on a stool with a chisel and hammer. The cabinet he was making needed several channels chiseled out to piece it together. And once Samuel knew what to do, he worked steadily and carefully. He kept his chisel sharp and worked smoothly. When Joseph came to check on his work and saw how well Samuel was working, he decided that he had a chance on a very skilled apprentice. For most of the day, except for a light lunch, they pressed on making the parts for 7 cabinets and then fitting them carefully together. Samuel was just finishing oiling the last cabinet when Joseph said it was time to call it a day. Doffing aprons and cleaning out, they finished for the day and went in to eat. The rest of the week, Joseph instructed Samuel on how to use all the different tools and how to begin to carve pictures into the wood. Samuel enjoyed learning how to carve wood pictures. He did a small panel that showed God on his cloud looking over the earth. Seated next to God was a small angel dangling his legs over the edge of the cloud. Joseph was amused at the carving and hung it in the workshop over the door. Samuel went outside later in the evening and met some of the local children. Once again, the appellation of Runt was given to him because of his size. He just let it slide. He learned to play as they did. His favorite game was similar to chess, played with stones. He also enjoyed wrestling. At wrestling, he couldn't be beaten. His small size was an asset, and he could squirm out of any hold. One day a week, the family would go into the center of town to hear the prophets speak. There was only one they favored and who they considered spoke with the authority of God. He was seated on an ornate chair that rested on a thick carpet. He was well dressed and looked down on the assembly with a stern and fierce countenance. He didn't speak to people, he roared at them. He didn't inform, he threatened. He spoke of God as if he were the most terrible judge and that no one was worthy to join him. He alone knew the way to salvation. It was with tithes, lots of tithes, and if they were not forthcoming, the people would perish in fire and stone. God was against the accumulation of wealth except for those who spoke for him. Samuel was pulling on his parents' arms to leave. The prophet stood and berated Samuel as a disturber, an evil one who was working to prevent him from giving out God's word and doing his work. "Pat, what do you know about God and God's word and work?" he muttered. The man raised an arm to strike Joseph's adopted son, but was stopped by the crowd. "All right, then let's hear what the child has to say." The prophet folded his arms and glared down at the runt. "Look, God doesn't care how much money you have. It's what you do with that money that's important. Use it to care for yourselves, then with what's left over, assist your neighbor if they need it. If your neighbor asks for help, then help them, for then you will be like God, who gives when he is asked, as long as what is asked is in your best interest. God is like a father, since he created us all, and like a father, he wants what is best for his children. He's like the father who teaches his children what they need to know to live and then sets us on the path. We look to the side and see something that we are curious about and go off the path. Sometimes we're hurt by this. God picks us up and brushes us off. He points us down the path again. Every time we stray, God is there to comfort us and put us back on the path. He never stops loving us and never stops pointing us on the right direction. The people had all moved, and Samuel was now the center of attention. The prophet kept trying to interrupt him, and every time people would tell him to be quiet, for this child spoke as if he truly knew God. They tried to give him money, but he refused it. I am not in need, or I would take what you offer. Hold aside what you would have given me, and when you see someone without cover, shelter them. When you see someone hungry, feed them. When you see someone cold, warm them. And with this benediction, he took his parents' hand and walked home. His parents were amazed at what he had spoken because he spoke quietly and with an authority none had heard before. Some of the people who had heard him speak followed them. Outside, he sat with them and answered questions and gave comfort. They said he had the patience of an angel when he took so much time with those who questioned him. Everyone left. After everyone left, he stayed outside and played with his friends for a while. As his mother prepared the evening meal, she questioned Joseph just on what manner of child they had brought home into their home. A week later, and they were in the center of town again. The difference was that the prophets came to them as well as the people. Samuel sat in the dirt and sand and spoke of God and what God was like. Yes, God could feel for his people. Yes, he had his favorites. No, that did not keep them from getting into trouble. He spoke of God giving humans free will and that people made their own choices. God was always there to help those who asked, but he doesn't interfere unless he's asked. In the back of the listeners stood the prophet he had seen the first time. Rage and envy were seething through him. So at least double or triple the listeners had come to hear him. Now nobody came to him. This upstart was even getting prophets to listen. Beg your pardon. Those took his words and adapted them to their own message. That evening, after they had eaten, the family slept the sleep of exhaustion. Joseph and his wife lay long ways on the bed, and Samuel slept at the foot across the short end. Outside, a stealthy figure crept in the total darkness and made its way to the workroom. A cloth was wrapped across their face so that only the eyes were visible. Those eyes blazed with hatred. He found a pile of shavings in a corner and poured oil from the workshop lamp over it. He withdrew his own lamp from hiding. Its fish oil provided a weak light, but it was enough for his purpose. He lit the shavings. The olive oil and shavings caught and burned brightly. He waited to see if the structure would catch, and when it did, he left stealthily. In the dead of night, the workshop fire spread. The light was visible, the smoke was not. People did not recognize that the workshop was on fire until it was too late. Samuel was woken from slumber by a familiar voice whispering in his ear. "Runt, get up and get your family out." The runt woke completely and smelled the smoke. He got his parents out of the house and ran to the well for water. Several of the neighbors brought pots or buckets, anything they could, and attempted to put out the fire. It was stopped before it reached the home portion. Joseph held his family close to him and thanked God for their deliverance. Joseph looked at the rack of his workshop. He poked around, gathering what was still usable. His wife and Samuel were gathering what they could from the home and loaded a cart. They would not stay where they were not wanted. In the darkness, hidden eyes watched the family prepare to leave. In wonder, they watched as neighbors who had heard Samuel speak drop coins into a pot in the cart. Joseph tied the donkey to the cart and sat on the seat holding his hand out for his wife. "Oh, come on, Mary. Perhaps Nazareth will be more welcoming." Mary climbed aboard, running with the effort, her midriff slightly swollen with a growing babe inside. Drumpy stood beside the cart. "It was on my account this happened. If I go with you, it may happen again. I pray to God to keep a special watch over you." He turned and walked away. Joseph leapt from the cart and chased after, but he couldn't find him. Walking dejectedly back to the cart, they drove away. God would do as Runt asked and keep a special watch over them. After all, he had a vested interest in their future. The next chapter is a new assignment. The Runt traveled and preached wherever he went. Sometimes welcomed, sometimes driven out, he continued until he reached the town of Babylonia. The Runt had traveled long and was tired and hungry. Stopping by a river to rest, he looked into the water. His reflection smiled back. The child he had been was now a man. He had been traveling for 10 years. A fish jumped out of the water, landing at his feet. The Runt looked up and thanked God for his meal. After eating, he lay back against a tree and slept. He was woken up by the sound of splashing. God was seated beside him and kicking his feet in the water. "Sorry, Runt, I was getting bored waiting for you to wake up." The Runt jumped up and ran to hug God. He passed through him and hit his head on the trunk of a tree. God couldn't repress his grin, but apologized for not being there in Corpus. "Runt, I want to take you home with me now." The Runt stopped rubbing a bump on his head and turned wide eyes on God. "Take me home now? Why? I thought I was doing so well bringing people back to you, teaching them about what you want and all." He flopped down hurt that he had, as he saw it, failed God. God solidified himself and hugged the Runt. "Oh, you've done splendidly. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished in the years you've been here, and all without using your powers." The Runt looked up into God's eyes and read a sadness and hurt he hadn't seen before. "God, what's going on? Please tell me." God lay back on the sand and looked up into the heavens. He closed his eyes and talked. "Runt, why you decided to come here, I really don't understand, but this place isn't safe for you. If you stick around, you're going to get hurt, and I mean really hurt." The Runt shrugged. "Well, that won't bother me. You should know that." God rolled onto his side and faced the Runt. "It's just because I know that I want to bring you home." The Runt shook his head no. God said, "Look, this place is as bad as Gomorrah, and their king doesn't like to be told that he's wrong. You go in there preaching, exhorting him to clean up his act, he's going to come down on you like a ton of bricks." The Runt nodded understanding. He had been through similar trials before, and God knew this. In all of them, though, he had never tried to spare himself by using his powers God allowed him to keep. His trials and tortures had brought more people to God than all his preaching. "God, you don't know why. You know why you don't fear death, since all it does is bring me home to you." God nodded, but hastened to explain. "Satan's here and working. He's now the advisor to Nebuchadnezzar and is slowly driving him mad. When Satan finds out you're here, he's going to hit you with everything he can. He still hates you and Gabriel." Runt stood up. When he did, he was at eye level with God when he was seated. "God, he can beat this body until every bone is broken. He can burn my skin till it's charred. He can do whatever he will do, and I still won't use my powers. For every bone broken, a person will convert to you because I show my faith. For every torture builds my fame in your name. I knew this would happen when I started. Let's face it, very few of your prophets die old. That's what makes them gain converts. It's a faith they showed in spite of all that wins people over." God acknowledged this was true, but the thought of his favorite going through hell on his behalf was breaking his heart. God slowly faded out back home. The Runt bathed in the river and washed his robe. He wanted to look presentable for his grand entrance. Walking through the gates of the city, he was suddenly overcome with emotions. All his bravado he had shown to God was gone in an instant. The realization of what was in store shook him to the core. God knew what was coming to him, and it had promised to be so bad that God wanted to take him home. He leaned against the gate and held his hand to his heart. Perspiration sprang onto his forehead, and his heart was beating fast. He had had bad experiences in the past, but had never known what to expect, or what evils were intended on him until they were done. Now he knew without doubt what was coming, and the fact that it also showed God made it 10 times worse. Gathering his courage, he began walking down the street, preaching and speaking to people. As he neared the palace, he called Nebuchadnezzar out for his persecution of God's chosen people. At the window, Nebuchadnezzar peered out and saw this diminutive person who challenged him. Behind him stood Satan, who had wormed his way into being his advisor. "Will you let this go unchallenged?" he whispered. The king called his guards to arrest the prophet. Well, that was quicker than I expected, thought the runt. He was led to a stone cell beneath the palace. The only light was from the outside and reached him as a dim glow. Footsteps were heard, but they echoed off the walls, making it sound as though an army were coming for him. A person with a torch unlocked the cell and strode importantly inside. He looked around with distaste and then looked on the runt seated on the floor. The runt looked up and smiled, and a smile of recognition crossed his face. "I know you, Satan. Have you come to pay me back for your banishment from heaven?" Satan brought the torch closer to the runt so that he could feel the heat on his cheek as Satan peered into his face. "I think I know you, even though you're much changed. You're the runt who is God's favorite." The runt nodded in acknowledgement. "I'm the runt." Satan placed the torch in a hole and leaned his back against the wall. A soft chuckle issued from him as he looked on the small figure. "So, God has cast you out as well. Not much help being God's favorite, is there?" He squatted and looked at the runt. "It seems I've been hearing about you a lot. Even though God has cast you out, you're still out here hawking for him. I heard God Nebula had you beaten. King Frangulus had you whipped. Others have favored you with more imaginative tortures, yet here you are, still singing God's praises and risking your hide for him." Satan laughed heartily. "Aren't you ready to give him up yet? Do you think he cares about you enough to rescue from what I have in store?" The runt trembled but shook his head. Satan looked around the dusty cell again. Nothing was in here except 4 walls of dusty floor and the 2 men. He sat down opposite the runt. "Look, I don't have anything against you or Gabriel. We chose to rebel against God and you chose to be on God's side." He shrugged. "We all make our choices and live by the consequences. Now I'm willing to forgive and forget. Now open that door and you can scoot out of here before anything happens to you." The runt looked at the door and back at Satan. "At what cost?" Satan patted the runt on the shoulder. "Nothing much. You see, I think after all you've been through, you're ready to admit God doesn't always take care of those he professes to love. He's selfish, and as long as he can use you or you keep praising him, he says he loves you. When things go south, that's when his true colors show. He dumps you like a hot potato and turns his back." The runt could feel the color rising to his face. His anger rose to the surface. "Never will I say that of God. Never will I forswear him." Satan rose and dusted himself off. "Well, I tried to spare you. Seems you want to be a martyr, so I'll oblige you. I'll give you a day and a half before we commence. Promise you it'll be most diverting. If you change your mind, let one of the guards know." In the cells, you could hear the other prisoners coughing and choking. The smell eventually presented itself to him, and he too started coughing. The cells were full of disease and filth, but they were prisoners, and prisoners had no value. A day and a half later, Satan came down to the runt cell. "No?" The runt shook his head. Satan sighed. "Well, I've done what I could." The guards came in and bound the runt's hands and feet, and then dragged him through the dirt, sand, and rocks. In the courtyard, he was made to lay down, and a guard stood on his wrists, another stood on his ankles. Satan has chosen the heaviest guards to pinion the runt down. The runt knew what was in store. He'd been flogged before. The person Satan chose to whip the runt was a master in the art of torture. They didn't use a lash, but a flagrum. The small bones tied into the end of the whip caused the bruising and cuts so that the runt was immediately in pain. After 20 strikes, the runt became insensible to anything but pain. At 30 strokes, the whip was halted, a black cloth was placed over the cuts, and the runt was staked out in the sun. Even though the whipping had stopped, he still felt the cuts and bruises. He knew his back must be a mottled mess by now. In the baking sun, the black cloth began to heat on the runt's back. At first, it actually felt pleasant and eased his sufferings. Soon, though, the heat increased and his back burned. He writhed in pain and contorted in an effort to throw the cloth off, but it was stuck fast with dried blood. The runt cried out and his tears fell. That's dry here. The crowd that had watched his whipping began to pity him and doused him with water from a nearby barrel. Satan, in his wisdom, had foreseen this, and the water was infused with salt. When they threw it over the runt, his pain was insurmountable. At the moment, the guards untied the runt, and at that moment, the guards untied the runt and dragged him into the cell. That night, Gabriel visited him, and while not allowed to heal him, gave him water to drink and food to eat. He caused the pain to vanish so that the runt was able to sit and talk. Gabriel tried to cheer him by talking about the new angels God had created. When the runt returned home, he would have to teach them pool. They were a slovenly group, and the finer points of reverse English were lost on them. The runt eventually tired, and Gabriel left with tears streaming at his friend's torture. He knew this was just the start. After a day during which the runt was fed on a dry husk of bread and salted fish twice a day, the runt was visited by Satan once more. "No?" he inquired. "Never," proclaimed the runt. Well, this time the runt was seated on a chair and his body tied into it at a chest and biceps and calves. A strand of leather was tied at the wrists and a stick tied to that so it could be tightened as tight as possible. Nearby, a fire was burning brightly and a bar of metal was heating up. Satan was standing nearby and watching the runt's face. The runt was scared. He had not been placed in this position before, and he could feel his hands growing numb. When they began to grow purple, Satan nodded, and the guard brought out a large sword. Seconds later, the runt's hands lay at his feet. The rod was removed from the fire, and the stumps cauterized. The pain was too much, and the runt fainted.
Probably the blonde people.
Dragged again back to his cell, he was left on the floor to recover when he would. A bowl of watery soup was left for when he awoke. Satan must have stayed up all night thinking up ways to torture the runt. This was torture with humiliation. When the runt woke up, the pain from the burning metal was still there. He could take hold of the bowl, but was forced to crawl on his belly and lap it up as a dog would. From the hidden corner of the cellar, Satan watched with pleasure as the runt was humiliated. He was sure that now the runt would berate God for abandoning him. He leaned against the door to the runt's cell. "Will you still tell me that God loves you?" The runt struggled to a sitting position. "Yes, and I still love him, and will not say different to please you or end these tortures." Satan became furious and kicked the door, hurting his foot and causing the runt to laugh at him, hopping around. Satan had him dragged out, and he was staked out once more. From his position in the dirt, he looked at the guard questioningly. "Haven't we done this already?" The guard marveled that the runt could jest after all that had happened to him. Satan nodded, and the guard wrapped cords around bicep and leg. When feeling was left in his extremities, Satan himself wielded the sword that chopped off the runt's arms and legs. Once again, the stumps were cauterized, and the pain caused the runt to faint. But he never cried out, causing the people watching to marvel. They began to pray on the runt's behalf and to praise the God who the runt worshipped. If a person could endure all that he had, and still proclaim love for his God, that God must be something special and worthy of worship. The sight of the crowd praising God and worshiping caused Satan to stomp and rage until he foamed at the mouth. Could a loving God allow this to happen to one he proclaims to love? The people exclaimed that it was the runt's fate that moved them. They would worship as he did. Enraged, he had the runt returned to his cell. Nebuchadnezzar had watched it from a window above the square, and he too marveled at the runt's faith and courage. "Let there be an end. Burn him at the stake and end this tonight." Satan would have preferred to spin the torches out more, but he would lose his position with Nebuchadnezzar had he persevered. Satan had the stake driven into the ground and wood placed surrounding it. A wood pole was driven into the post so that the runt would rest on it to remain in place. He was brought out at last and tied onto the pole. Satan offered him a chance to speak. The runt smiled, for his ordeal was ending at last. He smiled at Satan and bowed his head. I could have ended this at any time, but by allowing it to continue, I've just brought more people to God than I could have by any of my preaching. I thank you for the opportunity you've given me to do God's work. Satan roared and grabbed the torch from a guard's hand. Throwing it on the fire, he looked up at the runt. I'll send you back to God. Again, the runt thanked him as the flames grew and scorched his robe. The flames burst and quickly engulfed the runt. The strap holding him burnt away and his body fell into the fire. The sky grew black and the rain began to fall. The people cried out, "It is God crying because his child is going through this." They knelt and did worship so that Satan raged and cursed and the people mocked him as he danced and roared. A gust of wind blew and the flames died, but the runt was not to be seen. Clouds parted and a shaft of light shone through as an angel returned to heaven. Whole and sound, the runt arrived at heaven. He was greeted by a row of angels that cheered as he walked into the room where God and Gabriel sat. God stood and rushed to greet his favorite as the runt flew into his arms. God carried him and placed him on a throne next to Gabriel. The runt was exalted to have his own throne next to Gabriel on God's left side. To the right of God's throne was another exactly the same as God's. The runt's curiosity got the better of him and he had to ask, God, who's the other throne for? God handed him a cigar. Well, haven't you heard? I'm going to have a son. So that's it for this book, The Reluctant Left Hand of God. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you again. My next reading will be Truth, and I hope you'll be here for that. So until next time, thank you for being here. Be good and be good to yourself. Bye.